The stars outside the viewport looked like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Daniel Carter stood alone in the observation room of the starship Resolute, watching as the ship moved closer to the planet below. He was 34 years old, a former Marine who had spent 15 years serving Earth before becoming a diplomat. Now he carried the hopes of 8 billion people on his shoulders. The planet was called Prime. It was the throne world of the Empire, a civilization that had ruled over 17 star systems for more than 8,000 years. They were one of the oldest and most powerful species in the known galaxy. They had built cities when humans were still living in caves. They had conquered space when humans were still riding horses. And now, for the first time in history, they had invited humans to their home world. Daniel took a deep breath and turned away from the viewport. His reflection stared back at him from the polished metal wall. He saw a tall man with short brown hair and tired eyes. His simple dark suit was clean and pressed, but it was nothing special. He had chosen it carefully. No fancy decorations, no medals, just a man representing his people. The door behind him opened with a soft hiss. Lieutenant Morgan walked in, her boots clicking against the floor. She was his security advisor, a woman of 30 years with sharp eyes and a quick mind. She had served with Daniel in 3 different conflict zones before joining the diplomatic service. "We arrive in 2 hours," said. "Dr. Cole is reviewing the cultural protocols one more time." Daniel nodded. Dr. Cole was their cultural expert. He was a quiet man of 45 who had spent his entire career studying alien civilizations. He knew more about them than any other human alive. "How is the crew?" Daniel asked. "Nervous," admitted. "Everyone knows how important this is." Daniel understood their fear. The Galactic Council had been watching humanity for decades. They had seen humans split the atom. They had seen humans land on their moon. They had seen humans discover faster-than-light travel. And finally, after 100 years of observation, they had decided that humans were ready to join the galactic community. They were the gatekeepers. If humanity could establish good relations with them, doors would open across the galaxy. Trade routes would bring new technology. Alliances would bring security. Humanity would finally have a seat at the table. But if things went wrong, humanity might be shut out for generations. "We will do our best," Daniel said quietly. "That is all we can do." 2 hours later, the Resolute descended through the atmosphere of Prime. Daniel watched through the shuttle window as the planet revealed itself. Massive cities stretched across the landscape, their towers reaching toward the sky like silver fingers. Rivers of light flowed between the buildings, marking highways where countless vehicles moved in perfect order. They had built a paradise. Everything was clean and beautiful and organized. There was no poverty visible from above, no pollution darkening the sky, no signs of conflict or struggle. Daniel felt a strange mix of admiration and unease. Humanity had achieved much in its short history, but nothing like this. Earth still had problems, wars still happened, people still suffered. They had seemingly solved all of these issues thousands of years ago. The shuttle landed on a platform of white stone. As the doors opened, Daniel stepped out into warm sunlight. The air smelled sweet, like flowers he could not name. Before him stood a reception committee of officials. They were tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer in shades of blue and silver. Their eyes were large and amber-colored, and their faces were angular and beautiful in an alien way. They wore robes of flowing fabric that seemed to move even when there was no wind. One of them stepped forward. He was older than the others, with silver markings on his face that Daniel knew indicated high status. "I am Counselor," they said. His voice was deep and musical. "I welcome you to Prime on behalf of Her Majesty, Queen of House." Daniel bowed his head slightly. This was the proper greeting between equals, according to Dr. Cole's research. "I am Daniel Carter, representing the people of Earth. We are honored by your welcome." His expression was unreadable. He studied Daniel for a long moment, as if measuring him somehow. "The Queen will receive you in the throne room," said. "Please follow me." They walked through corridors of crystal and light, stayed close to Daniel's side, her eyes constantly scanning for threats, walked behind them, quietly recording everything he saw. Around them, courtiers stopped to stare at the humans. Daniel heard whispers in languages he did not understand. He saw smiles that did not seem friendly. He had expected this. Humans were new to the galaxy. They were curiosities at best, nuisances at worst. Many species looked down on them for their youth and their violent history. Daniel had faced prejudice before. He knew how to handle it. Stay calm, stay polite, stay focused on the goal. The throne room was enormous. The ceiling rose so high that clouds seemed to drift between the pillars. The floor was made of stone that glowed softly from within. Hundreds of nobles filled the chamber, standing in perfect rows on either side of a central aisle. At the far end of the room sat the throne. It was carved from a single massive crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. And upon that throne sat Queen. She was young. That was the first thing Daniel noticed. By standards, she was only 26 years old. She had inherited the throne from her mother just 3 years ago. Her skin was the pale blue of winter ice, and her eyes were the color of molten gold. She wore a crown of silver that seemed to float above her head, held in place by technology Daniel could not understand. She was beautiful, she was powerful, and she was looking at Daniel like he was an insect that had crawled into her palace. Daniel kept walking. His footsteps echoed in the vast chamber. Every eye was upon him. He could feel the weight of their judgment, their contempt, their amusement, but he did not let it show on his face. He stopped at the proper distance from the throne, not too close, which would be rude, not too far, which would show fear. He bowed his head again in the greeting of equals. "Your Majesty," Daniel said clearly, "I bring greetings from the people of Earth. We thank you for receiving us." Queen did not respond immediately. She sat perfectly still on her throne, her golden eyes fixed on Daniel. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then finally she spoke. "You may present your tribute." The words fell like stones into still water. Daniel felt stiffen beside him. He heard sharp intake of breath. Tribute, the word meant something very specific in culture. Tribute was what conquered peoples brought to their rulers. Tribute was what servants offered to their masters. Tribute was not what diplomatic equals exchanged. The insult was deliberate. The entire court understood it. Daniel could see the smiles spreading across the faces of the nobles. They were enjoying this. They wanted to see the human grovel. They wanted to see him beg for the queen's favor. Daniel stood perfectly still. He did not let anger show on his face. He did not let fear show in his eyes. He simply looked at the young queen on her crystal throne and understood exactly what kind of game she was playing. This was a test, and he had to decide how to respond. Daniel Carter had faced many difficult situations in his life. He had been shot at in 3 different wars. He had negotiated with terrorists while bombs ticked down nearby. He had held dying friends in his arms and kept fighting. But standing in that throne room, facing the contempt of an alien queen, he felt a different kind of pressure. The word tribute still hung in the air like smoke. The nobles waited in eager silence. They wanted to see how the human would react. Would he accept the insult? Would he crawl on his knees and offer gifts like a beaten servant? Daniel kept his voice calm and steady. "Your Majesty," he said, "Earth sends greetings as an equal partner in potential trade negotiations. We have brought gifts of goodwill, not tribute. The distinction is important." A wave of whispers swept through the throne room. They had never heard anyone correct their queen in her own palace. The nobles exchanged glances of shock and amusement. Some of them laughed openly. Queen's golden eyes narrowed. She leaned forward on her crystal throne, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You misunderstand your position, human," she said. Her voice was cold and sharp like breaking ice. "Your species is young, fragile. You possess nothing that the could want. Your presence here is a courtesy we extend to lesser civilizations." Daniel did not flinch. He had prepared for hostility. He had studied politics. He knew that the young queen was trying to prove herself to her court. She had inherited the throne at a young age, and some of her nobles still doubted her strength. Humiliating the human delegation would demonstrate her power. But understanding her reasons did not make the insult easier to bear. "With respect, Your Majesty," Daniel replied, "every species has something to offer. Humanity seeks only peaceful cooperation. We hope to learn from the and perhaps teach in return." More laughter echoed through the chamber. A tall noble with silver markings on his face stepped forward. Daniel recognized him as one of the queen's advisors, though he did not know the man's name. "Teach us?" the noble said loudly. "What could your kind possibly teach the? You are children playing with toys you barely understand. Your ships are slow, your weapons are weak, your culture is primitive." The noble turned to address the crowd, spreading his arms wide. "Perhaps we should put them in the menagerie," he announced. "They could live alongside the other curiosities we have collected from backward worlds." The throne room erupted in laughter. The sound crashed over Daniel like waves against rocks. He saw nobles pointing at him, mocking him, treating him like a circus animal. His hand moved toward the weapon hidden beneath her jacket, had gone pale as paper. Daniel raised his hand slightly, signaling them to stay calm. He would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing humans lose their composure. Queen watched the laughter with a small smile on her blue lips. She did not silence her nobles. She did not correct them. She let the mockery continue for a full minute before raising her hand. The throne room fell silent instantly. "Human," the queen said, "let me explain your situation clearly. The empire has existed for 8,000 years. We have conquered enemies that your species cannot imagine. We have built wonders that your species cannot comprehend. We have achieved perfection while your kind was still crawling through mud." She stood from her throne for the first time. Her robes flowed around her like liquid silver. She descended the steps slowly, each movement graceful and deliberate. "You came here hoping for partnership," continued. "That hope was foolish. The do not have partners. We have servants and subjects. We have resources to exploit and territories to rule." She stopped just a few feet from Daniel, close enough that he could see the cold amusement in her golden eyes. "Your species has two choices," she said softly. "You can accept our protection and pay tribute like good servants, or you can return to your little world and wait until we decide to take what we want." Daniel said nothing. He stood perfectly still, looking into the face of the young queen who thought she held all the power in the universe. "Tell me," continued, her voice carrying through the silent chamber, "what could your kind possibly offer the? Your technology is primitive. You are laughably short. Your culture is barely a footnote in galactic history. You are nothing." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I have read about Earth," the queen said. "Your species cannot even stop fighting among yourselves. You pollute your own world. You destroy your own resources. You kill each other over ideas and borders and imaginary lines on maps. You are a species of violent children who have somehow stumbled into space." The nobles behind her murmured in agreement. Heads nodded throughout the throne room. "Your species has two choices," she said softly. "You can accept our protection and pay tribute like good servants, or you can return to your little world and wait until we decide to take what we want." "Perhaps we should be grateful," said, turning to address her court. "The humans have provided excellent entertainment. It has been many years since I laughed so freely." More laughter filled the chamber. Daniel felt the heat of anger rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. He would not give them the reaction they wanted. Queen returned to her throne and sat down. She arranged her robes carefully, taking her time. Then she looked at Daniel with an expression of dismissive boredom. "You may leave the gifts on the floor," she said. "My servants will collect them later. We will examine what you have brought and decide what scraps to offer your begging species in return." She waved her hand as if brushing away a fly. "You are dismissed. Return to your ship and wait. We will summon you when we have decided your fate." The words echoed through the throne room. The nobles smiled and whispered among themselves. They had seen exactly what they wanted to see. The humans had come begging, and they would leave with nothing. The natural order of the galaxy had been confirmed. Daniel stood in the center of that hostile room, surrounded by enemies who saw him as less than a person. He thought about his instructions from Earth. He thought about the importance of this mission. He thought about the 8 billion people counting on him to succeed. And then he thought about something else. He thought about dignity. He thought about self-respect. He thought about what it meant to be human. And stood behind him, waiting for his decision. The court watched with smug satisfaction. Queen looked down from her throne with cold, golden eyes. Daniel Carter made his choice. He did not argue. He did not plead. He did not try to change their minds. He simply turned around and began walking toward the doors. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence, and exchanged confused glances, but they fell into step behind him. 3 humans walked down the long aisle of the throne room, past rows of shocked alien faces, toward the massive doors at the far end. Behind them, Queen rose from her throne. "Human," she called out, "you were not dismissed to leave. Return and accept our terms." Daniel did not slow his pace. He did not look back. He kept walking. "I am commanding you to stop," the Queen said, her voice rising with confusion and the first hint of anger. "Return immediately." Daniel reached the doors. They opened before him automatically, revealing the corridor beyond. "This is an insult to the throne," shouted. "There will be consequences for this disrespect." Daniel Carter, representative of Earth, stepped through the doors without saying a word, and followed him. The doors closed behind them with a deep, resonant boom that echoed through the throne room like the sound of something ending. The humans were gone. They had not fought, they had not submitted, they had simply walked away. And for the first time in 8,000 years, they did not know what to do. The throne room fell into absolute silence after the doors closed. Queen stood frozen beside her crystal throne, her golden eyes fixed on the spot where the humans had disappeared. She could not believe what had just happened. No one could. The nobles looked at each other in confusion. They had expected many things from the human delegation. They had expected groveling. They had expected anger. They had expected desperate attempts to negotiate or plead. What they had not expected was for the humans to simply turn around and leave. In 8,000 years of history, no species had ever walked away from their queen. Counselor, the elderly advisor who had greeted the humans at the landing platform, pushed through the crowd of nobles. His face had gone pale beneath his silver markings. He approached the throne with careful steps, his old hands trembling. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, so only the Queen could hear, "do you understand what just happened?" Turned to face him. Her beautiful features were twisted with anger and confusion. "The human was rude," she snapped. "He insulted me in my own throne room. We will teach them their place. Send a message to their ship. Demand that they return and apologize." Shook his head slowly. "Your Majesty, I do not think you grasp the situation." "Then explain it to me," the Queen demanded. The old counselor took a deep breath. He had served the throne for over 200 years. He had advised the Queen's mother and grandmother before her. He had seen many things in his long life, but he had never seen anything like what had just occurred. "They walked away," said. "They did not fight us. They did not threaten us. They did not beg or plead. They simply turned around and left." "And that is an insult," insisted. No, Your Majesty, that is something far more dangerous. His voice dropped even lower. They showed the entire galaxy that they do not need us. The Queen stared at him in confusion. That is absurd. Every species needs we control the trade routes. We have the most advanced technology. We rule 17 star systems. And they walked away from all of it, said, without hesitation, without anger, without fear. They looked at everything we have and they decided it was not worth accepting our terms. In the corridor outside the throne room, Daniel Carter walked with steady steps toward the landing platform. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his face showed nothing. And followed close behind him, both of them struggling to understand what had just happened. Daniel whispered urgently, "What are you doing? This could destroy everything we worked for." "It was already destroyed," Daniel replied without slowing down. The moment she demanded tribute, the mission was over. There was nothing to negotiate. "But maybe we could have found another way," said. "Maybe if we had offered the gifts, shown them what Earth has to offer, they would have changed their minds." Daniel stopped walking. He turned to face his colleagues and they saw something in his eyes that they had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something quieter and deeper. Daniel said, "I have spent my entire career being told to compromise, to accept insults for the greater good, to smile when people treat me like dirt because that is what diplomacy requires." He shook his head slowly. "But some things cannot be compromised. Some insults cannot be accepted." That Queen looked at humanity and saw nothing. She saw primitives to be exploited. She saw servants to be commanded. She saw toys for her amusement. Daniel's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. If we had stayed, if we had accepted her terms, we would have confirmed everything she believed. Humanity would have been marked as weak forever. Every species in the galaxy would have seen us crawl, and they would have treated us accordingly. "So what do we do now?" asked. "We leave," Daniel said simply. "We go home, we report what happened, and we let the figure out what they lost." They continued walking. Behind them, they could hear distant shouting from the throne room. They were arguing among themselves, trying to decide how to respond to this unprecedented situation. Back in the throne room, Queen had returned to her throne. Her nobles gathered around her, all of them speaking at once. Some demanded immediate military action against the humans. Some called for diplomatic pressure through the Galactic Council. Some simply stood in stunned silence, unable to process what had occurred. "Your Majesty," Admiral said, pushing to the front of the crowd. He was a veteran military commander with dozens of successful campaigns behind him. "Give me the order and I will pursue their ship. We will bring them back in chains." "On what grounds?" Counselor asked sharply. "They have committed no crime. They have violated no treaties. They simply declined our hospitality." "Their refusal to pay tribute is an act of defiance," argued. "An insult to the throne." "We asked for tribute," countered. "They never agreed to give it. We cannot punish them for refusing to accept terms they never accepted." The argument continued while Queen sat in silence on her throne. She was thinking about the human's face in those final moments. She had expected to see fear when she delivered her ultimatum. She had expected to see desperation. Instead, she had seen something else entirely. She had seen pity. The human had looked at her, the queen of the empire, ruler of 17 star systems, and he had her. As if she were the one who did not understand. As if she were the one making a mistake. The thought made her blood run cold. "Enough," she finally said, her voice cutting through the arguments. The throne room fell silent instantly. "Send a message to their ship," ordered. "Politely request that they return to continue discussions. Tell them that we are prepared to reconsider our position." The nobles exchanged shocked glances. The Queen had never reconsidered anything. The Queen had never requested anything. Yet here she was, bending before a species she had called primitive just minutes ago. Counselor bowed his head. "It will be done, Your Majesty." But when the message was sent, the humans did not respond immediately. Minutes passed, then hours. The communication officers reported that the human ship was preparing to leave orbit. "They are ignoring us," Admiral said incredulously. "They received our message and they are ignoring it." Queen felt something she had never felt before in her young reign. She felt uncertain. She felt worried. She felt, in some small part of her heart, afraid. The human ship Resolute broke orbit and turned toward open space. Daniel Carter stood on the bridge, watching Prime shrink behind them, and stood beside him, along with the rest of the crew. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "they are sending another message. They are requesting that we return." Daniel nodded slowly. "Acknowledge receipt of the message, nothing more." "Sir, no response." "No response," Daniel confirmed. "Let them wait, let them wonder, let them learn." The ship accelerated toward the jump point that would carry them home. Behind them, the throne world of the Empire grew smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light among millions. And on that distant world, a young queen sat alone on her throne, staring at the empty space where the humans had stood, trying to understand the terrible mistake she had made. The silence was just beginning. 3 days passed after the human delegation left Prime. The Empire sent message after message to Earth, but they received only silence in return. Not angry words, not threats, not demands, just nothing. Queen had never experienced anything like it. Throughout her entire life, species had competed for her attention. They had begged for audiences with her court. They had offered gifts and tributes and promises of loyalty. No one had ever simply stopped talking to her. On the 4th day, reports began arriving from the frontier trade stations. Human merchant vessels that had been traveling toward space had changed course. They were heading in different directions now, toward other regions of the galaxy. Corporate contracts worth billions of galactic credits were being quietly dissolved. Scientific exchange programs were being suspended indefinitely. The Queen summoned her council to the war room deep beneath the palace. The chamber was ancient, carved from solid rock and lined with screens showing data from across the Empire. Her advisors gathered around the central table, their faces grim. "This is an act of economic warfare," Admiral declared. His scales had flushed a deep purple with anger. "The humans are attacking us without firing a single weapon. We must respond with force." "Against whom?" Counselor asked quietly. "They have committed no hostile act. They have broken no laws. They have simply stopped engaging with us." "Their refusal to trade is the hostile act," insisted. "They are damaging our economy. They are undermining our position in the galaxy." "They are exercising their right to choose their own partners," replied. "That is not aggression. That is freedom." The argument continued for hours. The military leaders wanted to send warships to intercept human vessels and force them to comply with demands. The economic advisors wanted to impose sanctions and trade barriers. The diplomatic corps wanted to file complaints with the Galactic Council. But none of them could agree on what, exactly, the humans had done wrong. Queen sat at the head of the table, listening to her advisors argue. She thought about the human who had stood in her throne room. Daniel Carter. She had looked up his name after he left. He was nobody special by human standards, a former soldier who had become a diplomat, a middle-aged man with no noble blood, no family fortune, no great achievements. Yet he had done something that no noble had ever dared to do. He had looked at the Queen of the Empire and decided that she was not worth his time. "Find out what they want," finally ordered, silencing the arguments. "Open negotiations. Offer them better terms. Find out what it will take to bring them back to the table." Her advisors stared at her in shock. The Queen was offering to negotiate. The Queen was suggesting that they might need to change their position. It was unthinkable. But Counselor simply bowed his head. "It will be done, Your Majesty." The message was sent through official diplomatic channels. They offered to meet with Earth's representatives at a neutral location. They suggested terms that were significantly more favorable than before. They expressed interest in genuine partnership. The response came 3 days later. It was a single sentence. Message received and acknowledged. Nothing more, no acceptance, no rejection, no counteroffer, just an acknowledgement that the message had arrived. "They are mocking us," Admiral growled when he saw the response. "This is deliberate humiliation." But Counselor shook his head slowly. "No, Admiral, this is something worse. They simply do not care enough about us to respond." Meanwhile, word of what had happened in the throne room was spreading across the galaxy. They had tried to keep the incident secret, but too many nobles had witnessed it. Stories leaked out through trade networks and diplomatic channels. Within a month, every major species in the galaxy knew that a human had walked out on the Queen. The reaction was extraordinary. The Federation, longtime rivals of the, immediately reached out to Earth. They offered full diplomatic recognition, trade agreements, and technology sharing. Their delegation met with human representatives on a neutral space station and treated them with the utmost respect. The Collective, a union of smaller species that had lived in fear of for centuries, sent their own ambassadors to Earth. They signed cooperation agreements that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Even the ancient empire, which had maintained strict isolation for 10,000 years, expressed interest in opening communications with humanity. Their cryptic message stated simply, "We wish to understand a species that knows how to walk away." Species that had barely noticed humanity before were suddenly paying attention. Not because humans had won a great battle, not because humans had developed amazing technology, but because humans had demonstrated something that no one else had ever shown. Humans had proven that they could not be controlled by shame or fear or greed. On Earth, Daniel Carter delivered his report to the World Council. He stood before the assembled leaders of humanity and explained exactly what had happened in the throne room. He explained why he had made the choice to leave. He explained the consequences. Some of the council members were angry. They accused him of destroying a vital diplomatic opportunity. They demanded to know why he had not tried harder to salvage the situation. But others understood. "You showed them that we have self-respect," said Councilwoman Hayes, the senior representative from the North American Union. "You showed them that humanity cannot be bullied or bought. That has value, perhaps more value than any trade agreement." The debate continued for days. Some wanted to punish Daniel for his actions. Others wanted to promote him. In the end, the council decided to wait and see what would happen next. They did not have to wait long. As months passed, the consequences of that single moment in the throne room became clear. The galaxy was changing. Species that had accepted dominance for thousands of years were starting to ask questions. If the humans could walk away, why could they not do the same? The economic reports showed declining trade across all sectors. Partners were finding alternative arrangements. Allies were becoming less cooperative. The empire that had seemed eternal and unshakable was developing cracks. And through it all, Earth remained silent. The humans did not gloat. They did not make demands. They did not threaten or posture or negotiate. They simply went about their business, building relationships with species that treated them as equals. Daniel Carter returned to his normal duties. He was assigned to a small diplomatic mission to the Collective, nothing glamorous or important. He did his job quietly and professionally, just as he always had. But sometimes, late at night, he would stand at a viewport and look out at the stars. He would think about that throne room on Prime. He would think about the young queen with her golden eyes and her ancient crown. And he would wonder if she had learned anything yet. On Prime, Queen was learning. Slowly, painfully, she was beginning to understand what she had lost, Every report that crossed her desk showed the same story. The humans were succeeding without her. The galaxy was changing without her permission. For the first time in her life, she felt small. 6 months had passed since Daniel Carter walked out of the throne room. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. And on Prime, Queen stood alone in her private chambers, studying the latest intelligence reports with growing despair. The numbers told a story of decline. Trade with the Empire had dropped by 40%. 3 of their oldest allies had begun negotiations with Earth. 2 frontier systems were talking openly about independence. The economic damage was measured in trillions of credits, but the political damage was immeasurable. For 8,000 years, they had ruled through fear and prestige. Species obeyed them because they believed they had no choice. They were too powerful, too advanced, too important to defy. But now that belief had been shattered. A single human had proven that there was always another choice. You could simply walk away. Set down the reports and walk to her window. The great city stretched out below her, still beautiful, still magnificent. But she no longer saw it the same way. She saw the cracks now. She saw the weakness that had always been hidden beneath the glittering surface. They had built their empire on the assumption that everyone wanted what they had to offer. They had never considered what would happen if someone decided they did not want it. They had never prepared for a species that valued dignity more than profit. The door chimed, and Counselor entered the chamber. The old advisor moved slowly now, as if the weight of recent events had aged him another century. "Your Majesty," he said, "the human ambassador has responded to your latest request." Turned from the window. Despite everything that had happened, she felt a spark of hope. For 6 months, she had been trying to open communications with Earth. For 6 months, she had received nothing but polite acknowledgments. "They will negotiate?" she asked. Hesitated before answering. "They have agreed to meet, but not here on Prime. They have proposed neutral ground at the Collective's diplomatic station." Nodded slowly. She had expected this. The humans would not come crawling back to her throne room. They would not give her that satisfaction. "What else?" she asked, sensing there was more. "They have made one request," said carefully. "They have asked that you attend personally, not as a queen receiving tribute but as an equal seeking partnership." The words hung in the air between them. Understood what was being asked. The humans wanted her to humble herself. They wanted her to stand before the galaxy and admit that they were not superior beings who commanded obedience from lesser species. Part of her wanted to refuse. Part of her wanted to cling to the old ways, the old pride, the old certainty. But she was not the same queen who had sat on that throne 6 months ago. She had learned too much. She had seen too clearly. "I will go," she said quietly. Bowed his head. "Your Majesty, if I may speak freely." "You always do, old friend." "What you did in that throne room was wrong," said. "I should have told you then, but I was too afraid. The way you treated that human, the contempt you showed, it was unworthy of the throne. We are better than that, or at least we should be." Closed her eyes. The words hurt, but she knew they were true. "How do I fix this? How do I repair the damage I have done?" "By learning the lesson the human tried to teach you," the counselor replied. "Respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned." 2 weeks later, Queen's ship arrived at the diplomatic station. She had brought a small delegation, just a handful of advisors and guards. No grand display of imperial power, no demands for special treatment. The humans were waiting for her in a simple conference room. Daniel Carter stood at the head of the table, looking exactly as he had 6 months ago. Calm, patient, unremarkable. Entered the room and stopped just inside the door. For a long moment, she and Daniel simply looked at each other. The weight of everything that had happened hung between them like a physical presence. Then did something that no ruler had done in 8,000 years. She bowed her head to a human. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I owe you an apology. Daniel's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of respect, perhaps, or recognition. "Your Majesty," he replied, "please sit down. We have much to discuss." They talked for hours, not about trade agreements or territorial boundaries or technology sharing. They talked about understanding. They talked about respect. They talked about what it meant to build relationships between species that were truly equal. Found herself speaking honestly for the first time since she had taken the throne. She admitted her fears, her insecurities, her desperate need to prove herself worthy of her crown. She explained how she had been taught that they were superior, that other species existed only to serve them. Daniel listened without judgment. When she finished, he spoke quietly. "Your Majesty, when I walked out of that throne room, I was not trying to humiliate you. I was trying to show you something that no one had ever shown you before." "What was that?" asked. "That you had a choice," Daniel said. "You could have treated us with respect from the beginning. You could have seen us as potential partners instead of potential servants. The power was always in your hands." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But when you chose contempt instead of respect, you gave us a choice too, and we chose to leave. Not because we hated you, not because we wanted revenge, simply because we would not accept being treated as less than we are." Nodded slowly. She understood now. The humans had not walked away to punish her. They had walked away because staying would have meant accepting her definition of who they were. "What happens now?" she asked. Daniel smiled for the first time since they had met. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. "Now we start over," he said. "Not as master and servant, not as superior and inferior, as equals learning from each other, building something new together." "Is that possible, after everything I did?" "Humans believe in second chances," Daniel replied. "We believe that people can change. The question is not whether it is possible. The question is whether you are willing to do the work." The negotiations continued for 3 days. When they ended, the Empire and the planet Earth had signed a framework agreement for genuine partnership. It was not a perfect document. It would take years of work to implement, but it was a beginning. As Queen prepared to leave the station, she found Daniel Carter standing alone in an observation lounge, looking out at the stars. "May I join you?" she asked. He nodded, and she stood beside him at the viewport. "I have been thinking about what you said," told him, "about respect being earned rather than demanded. I believe I understand it now." "Understanding is the first step," Daniel agreed. "I have a question for you, Mr. Carter. When you walked away that day, were you not afraid? They could have destroyed your ship. We could have declared war on your entire species." Daniel was quiet for a moment before answering. "Yes," he admitted. "I was terrified. Every step I took toward those doors, I expected to feel a weapon at my back. I expected to hear orders for my arrest. I expected my decision to cost me everything." "But you walked anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Daniel turned to face her. His eyes were calm and steady, the eyes of a man who had made peace with himself long ago. "Because some things matter more than safety," he said. "Some things matter more than success. If I had stayed, if I had accepted your terms, I would have betrayed everything I believe in. I would have told the galaxy that humans can be bought and bullied and broken." He shook his head slowly. "We are not perfect, Your Majesty. Humans have done terrible things throughout our history. We have made countless mistakes, but we have also learned something important along the way." "What is that?" "That the moment you stop respecting yourself, you lose everything that matters. Dignity is not something you can buy or negotiate. It is something you carry inside you, and you either defend it or you surrender it." Queen looked at this ordinary human man who had taught an empire a lesson it would never forget. She saw no anger in his face, no pride, no satisfaction at humbling her. She saw only a person who knew who he was and what he believed. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "for the lesson and for the second chance." Daniel nodded. "Use it well, Your Majesty." Their ships departed the station and sailed off in different directions. The Queen returned to her empire with new understanding. The diplomat returned to his work with quiet satisfaction. And across the galaxy, species who had watched these events unfold began to look at humanity with new eyes. Not because humans were the strongest or the most advanced, but because humans had shown them something they had forgotten. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept being treated as less than you are. You turn around, you walk away, and you let the silence speak for itself.